President Trump hosted a meeting with video game makers and their critics at the White House today. He was busy. And the president recently expressed shock at what young people are exposed to today.
I see it. I get to see things.
It's great to have you both on. Let's start with you, David, because some of these games are really wild. I mean, they're pretty graphic, pretty gory. You know them, Call of Duty. I don't Call of Duty. Call of Duty. I don't do any of these. Millions and millions of people play these video games. I mean, girls aren't as into these video games, I'm sorry, as boys are, but I think if my sons had access to them, I'm sure they'd play them all the time, because something about the boy's brain and these games. But why are you not worried about it? Maybe as a society, we have to talk about what numbing ourselves to this very graphic violence. It's not like cartoon. This looks like a real person's head exploding. And it's over and over and over again, and you're doing it 10 hours a day, and you're playing with people in other countries. That's where you're getting your stimulation, and that's listening to the outside now.
And I'd love making love to you. Video game violence and the media's obsession with bringing it back up every 6 months is something that I'm sure you're all more than familiar with, and most likely you're also of the opinion that violence in video games doesn't necessarily lead to violent actions. I know it, you know it, Andy Crane knows it, but it's also worth pointing out that the certain depictions of things probably aren't too good for children to see early. I have an 8-year-old daughter at home, for example, and I'm not about to sit down and pop some prostitutes in the booty with a machete while she asks, "Daddy, why are you making the women go to no sleepy times?" Video games were, at some point in time, a free-for-all though. There was no age rating system, and it was only thanks to Captain America and his incessant quest to protect the children that the great US of A ever got a rating system enforced on it. And personally, I think that's probably for the better. Some games really are better off out of reach of younger humans. In the UK though, games classification was a little bit wonky. The first game to be classified by the BBFC was a text adventure game called Dracula, which, had it been printed as a book, wouldn't have received a classification at all, so that's dumb. And then they started getting all banhammery and we're all like, no, you can't play Carmageddon, and then Carmageddon's mum and dad said, but what if we make the blood green? And the BBFC were like, well, alright, just this one time. And then Manhunt 2 got banned. The thing that always makes me laugh though is that violence in video games has been around for so long. It's practically a core feature of the medium, and it was only when the hobby began to grow and flourish that Daddy Certification decided to step in and say, hey, no. Prior to all of this, games could get away with the weirdest and wildest things, and one such game, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already guessed, which, let's be honest, you should have done, it's in the title of the video. Anyway, it's Bop'N Rumble on the Commodore 64. Don't get me wrong, Bop'N Rumble isn't particularly violent per se. There's no gore or explosions or bodies being torn in twain, but it's the subject of who you're fighting that caught me off guard. It caught me off guard because, to put it bluntly, it's so nonsensically over the top that I find it absolutely hilarious. Bop'N Rumble sees you as, presumably Hulk Hogan, walking along the street beating up blind men, old women, gorillas, dogs. Honestly, it reads like a who's who of things you wouldn't particularly expect to be punching in the face. When a gorilla is the most obvious enemy in the game, you know you're onto something wild. If the name Bop'N Rumble doesn't mean anything to you, then maybe one of its other names will, because it was also released as Street Hassle and Bad Street Brawler. I have no idea why they decided to release it under 3 different names in the space of a year, but considering David Pentecost only worked on one other game for the C64, Asterix and the Magic Cauldron, it at least fills out his CV a bit. The other half of the coding team was made up of Andrew Davey, who also worked on Asterix, but went on to make a couple of versions of Pac-Man as well. Why not? Working alongside Russell Comte, who made up the entirety of the graphics department, Bop'N Rumble, Street Hustle, or Bad Street Brawler, whatever you want to call it, certainly seems like the most standout title in their arsenal. What really makes things tick along at a nice pace is that this doesn't really play like a traditional beat-em-up at all. It plays like a grapple-em-up. Instead of the standard punch-punch-kick of similar titles and an isometric 2D plane to traverse, Bop'N Rumble opts for a linear 2D field and a lot of grabby-grabby headbutts, or grabby-grabby spin moves, or ear twists. There's a lot of moves, and they're all fairly simply executed with just a button press plus a direction of your choosing. While the game has been boiled down to simplicity, there's still the usual requirements of trying to position yourself somewhere where you're not going to be surrounded and beaten to death with sticks, and ensuring that you position yourself at the correct distance before attempting to execute one of your maneuvers becomes second nature. Almost. What does become a little annoying is that the enemies you're fighting may be in a position to attack you, but you're not quite in the position to attack them. And it's not helped by the fact that your lead character is such a slow, lumbering oaf. When traversing from left to right or trying to avoid enemies, it's often best to jump your way along as if you're skipping down the street, which doesn't really convey the badass masculine bro thematics I'm sure they were aiming for, but oh well, that's a thing. There are some other nuisances. The game is particularly tough, for instance, and it doesn't always feel like it's your own fault, even though it probably is. You'll often be stun locked into submission, and there's no way to block or quickly remove yourself from a situation when this kind of thing occurs. You just have to accept either a battered health bar or a lost life. You'll also find yourself relying on certain moves to get you through a level, but you can't rely on them too much because in a surprising twist of fate, Hulk Hogan changes his moveset with each and every level. This is actually a pretty smart move and does a good job to instill some variety in a game that's fairly simple on its own. In one level you might be chest bumping old women in the face, in another you might be spinning a blind man over the top of your head. It's another layer of humour that manages to keep you interested in what your next moveset is, but it also means that you've got to quickly work out what the hell it is you can actually do when a level starts. Overall, though, it's not quite enough to push Bop'N Rumble into the territory of other side-scrolling beat-em-ups, mostly because things get very repetitive very quickly. Enemies don't change too much, although there is the odd new person who shows up, like this breakdancer who can spin you around with his slick moves, or this, probably racist caricature of a basketball player. Moving on. You'll mostly be fighting the same few enemy types is the real issue. Blind people, old women and gorillas. I mean, I'll say it again, it's a good core set. There's no denying that that is an interesting lineup for a standard set of enemies, but their consistent appearance is rather disappointing. On starting the game and seeing these first few enemy types, you're kind of eager to see just how far they'll go with this comedy route. I mean, sometimes they perhaps go too far, but what I mean to say is that I'd have liked to see more wildly inappropriate or downright weird enemies to fight. Couple this with a set of levels that are practically identical, the slow pace of the lead character, the lack of environmental interaction, a difficulty curve that's practically a horizontal line outside of a few blips. It's a game that shows the promise of variety and interesting concepts, but doesn't quite deliver on them. That being said, I had fun with it until I stopped having fun with it, and that's the key here really. It's a game that, if picked up cheaply enough, can offer a decent 20 to 30 minutes of fun before you pop it away for a few months and try it out again another time. It's also a game that, at the very least, gives us a glimpse into a world of violence that the media pretty much ignored, one in which you can beat the shit out of a blind guy while an old woman throws handbags at your head. Vintage hooliganism has certainly got its charms.